What else? How else would you word it? Or what does it look like?
Not to obey him.
Not to obey him. Good.
I think the word oppose, to go into semantics, sounds active. Not just someone who ignores
Right.
Christ, but someone who pushes back.
Right. Goes out of their way, right? It's one thing just to say no, but it's a whole other thing to do something to degrade somebody else, right? Okay, so you kind of being an active negative is kind of what we would talk about linguistically, right? And so the idea of opposing Christ, it's very active. Someone is standing against doing something opposite of who our Savior Jesus Christ is. Now, maybe that's very loud and in your face. Maybe that is in conversation. No, I don't like him, right? That kind of thing. But maybe reading the end part of 1 John chapter 2, maybe we can start to think about some other ways that we usually don't think about what it means to oppose Christ. Okay? So let's go to 1 John chapter 2. Let's look at the first few verses in 1 John chapter 2 for this morning. Let's drop down to verse 15. 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15. All right, do not love the world, John says, or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but it's from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides or lives forever. So John is going to write about, in our study of lessons from 1 John this morning, John's going to start this conversation with this phrase of do not love the things in the world, or do not love the world, he also says, right? James 4 talks about what it means to be a friend of the world. Someone who is a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. 1 John 1, we read a couple of weeks ago what it means to walk in darkness. Last week, earlier on in 1 John chapter 2, we read about, in verses 4 and 5, someone who lies and does not keep his commandments. But let me ask you a question, okay? So John writes, do not love the world or the things in the world. But some of you said with our first question that you love some things in the world. Is that not right? Kind of a aha, gotcha moment, right? We love maybe our families. We maybe love going and doing different things. We maybe love our job. We maybe love to go fish or have different hobbies, right? We love doing things and having things. We are loving things in the world. Now, I understand that's not the exact point that John's getting across, but I want us to think about how much do we love those things. Now, certainly loving your family or loving the things that you have, counting your blessings, that's wonderful. But like I usually talk about with the teenagers, when does something ever become a problem? Go ahead.
This morning on the way in to town, I drive by the golf course, saw a guy playing golf with a little fellow following right behind him. The little guy couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Cute as a button. And I thought, that's a great thing that dad to do with his son on Saturday morning. But here it is, Sunday morning.
Right.
Not such a great thing.
An idea is when does anything become a problem? With 13-year-olds, with 30-year-olds, with 80-year-olds, whatever you want to put there. When does something become a problem? It's when it interferes with our relationship with our Father. Now, our family, we can absolutely love our family. But when that starts to come between our relationship with God, I think Jesus talked a little bit about that, that might cause a little bit of a problem. We might absolutely love our house or our car or whatever different material things that we have, and they're a major blessing. But those things might start to come between us and our relationship with our Father. We might really love to go golf or to go fish or to have a particular hobby or to travel, but when those things start to take away from our relationship with God, that's when it becomes a problem. We might really love our job and we might be the boss at our job, but when that job or our occupation comes between us and our relationship with our Father, that's when it becomes a problem. John says, don't love the world or the things in the world. And I think it's inferred, okay? I think it's inferred in that passage, don't love the world or the things in the world more than our Father. That might lead us to sin or lead us into sin. He talks about some specifics here, right? The specifics of the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Have you ever thought about those three things and maybe what they entail? The lust of the flesh, it's a desire to gain something. A desire to gain something. Maybe something of nature, maybe specifically sexual or physical. The lust of the eyes, desiring something because it looks good. We're going to go eat lunch here after morning worship, and you might, you have that tendency at a church meal, you get your plate at the front of the line, and only a few steps later you look down and your plate is mounded over. And you get down and you sit and you start eating and you're like, oh, my eyes were bigger than my belly, right? It looked good. Sometimes the lust of the desires of the eyes, the lust of the eyes, it's desiring something because it looks good. Maybe the ideas of covetousness, material gain, or possessions fit in this category. Maybe even something of a mental or emotional capacity. It looks like it will be good for me, but I haven't experienced it yet. And then this idea of the pride of life, desiring to gratify ourselves. That this says, I did this, or I deserve this, or this comes with the work that I put in, right? It's all about me. Okay? Something environmental. It sets me above someone else because of how I earned it. Because of what I put in. Because of what I can do and have done and will keep doing, right? I want us to think about a verse that we will not get to, but in 1 John chapter 4, look at verse 19. Verse 19. Really simple. You might can quote it. We love because He first loved us. It's understood that within that passage is we love Him because He first loved us. Now, what did John just say? John just said, don't love the world or the things in the world. This desire of the flesh, this desire of the eyes, and this pride of life to try and make something very relatable. How do we feel when we love and care about someone? We love and care about someone so passionately, so importantly, so heavily, right? We absolutely love someone. We go out of our way to help them at any cost. And the other person doesn't love us back. Or the other person doesn't give in the same effort to love us back or show us they love us back like we gave to them. Maybe a concept that John also talks about, right? He talks about the immaculate love that Christ has for us. But he also talks about, hey, where is our love and priority? Have you ever thought about how does the Father, how does the Spirit, how does the Son, how do they feel when we don't love them back. When we show them that we would rather love things in the world, or we would rather love the world in its sinful natures and activities and doing this and doing that, and it becomes a problem because it comes in between our relationship with the Father. How do they feel when maybe we don't show that we love them back? Any thoughts on that idea or concept this morning? Feel unloved.
That's not a good thing to leave with someone.
Man, I know how bad we hurt when we feel like somebody doesn't love us. And that might be just like one person, right? One interaction, one relationship. But think about the emotional capacity that our Father has to have a relationship with billions of us. Think about the emotional weight of that many people not loving Him back.
Does that not cause us to desperately grasp for a reason to love someone?
True.
Which means we need to get to know them.
Sure. Mr. Barney, what were you going to say?
Christ was saying, if you love your brothers and sisters, your mother, father more than me,
Yep. You can't
you're
follow
not
me.
mine.
Yep. Yep. Christ talked about how if you do not deny your mother, father, brother, sister, you cannot be a disciple of mine, right? Has other thoughts on the love and relational aspect, on how our Father feels when we do not love Him back?
So it seems like we're the ones that are damaged by not loving God, because God is 100% love. So
Yeah.
it's not anything that negatively affects the Trinity. It's us that reaps the repercussions of not fulfilling that relationship.
Sure, absolutely. And there's this concept of, okay, well, like Gerald was talking about, that God is love and He doesn't need us. He doesn't need us for anything to be self-sufficient and necessary. I absolutely agree. But He also has the emotional capacity to feel because of the relationship with the Son, right?
Yeah, Brady, you know in Genesis when he saw the wickedness of the world, he said it grieved him.
Yep. He regretted that He had made man, which brings a connotation of sorrow. This idea it's not just words on a page when John is writing. Do not love the world or the things in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life. We might have read those things hundreds of times for those of us who have been here and maybe grown up in the church and all that kind of stuff. We've heard a bunch of lessons on that. And sometimes we just, like a slide, and go on right past them, and we don't necessarily think about, okay, well, we severely dislike it when someone doesn't love us, right? Maybe a family member, you have an argument or whatever that looks like, and you're just at odds for the day, for the week, whatever that looks like. But we very seldomly think about how do our actions make the Godhead feel? Don't love the world or the things in the world. Let's touch on those three different things that John explains about loving the world. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Which of those three, okay, so which of those three do we think is the biggest problem in our world today? What do you think and why? Which one do you think is the biggest problem or biggest struggle for just people in general in the world today? The lust of the flesh, okay, very, very physical or sexual in nature. The lust of the eyes, the covetousness, the greediness, or then the pride of life, the arrogance, or the non-humility?
I think most of the problem is two actually.
Okay.
The greed and the lust of the flesh,
Okay.
are why our marriages don't hang together a lot.
Okay.
Because the lust of the flesh is actually what generates it to come together.
Sure.
And of course, the greed is what you see how many people are trying to get more money.
Okay.
That's the way I see it.
Yeah. So Mr. Londy said the desires of the flesh draw people together, and that enacts the sinful nature sometimes. And then the desire of the eyes is greediness, people wanting more and more and more and more. Right? Okay? Anyone else? Any other thoughts on which is maybe the biggest struggle?
Can those three be actually separated?
Maybe not.
I mean, because just look at how people have raised their children in the last generation. You know, they've got to have the best shoes, they need to have a cool car. You know, maybe if you don't have to work, you can sponge off your folks and you know, do whatever you want to do.
Maybe so.
Pretty much go where you want to go anymore
Sure.
and act any way you want to act.
And I think all three of them play off of one another, right? If you start giving in to one of them, how much easier is it to start giving in to others in the same category, right? So in this idea of the pride of life, it's all me, it's all me, it's all me, it's all me. Well, I can have physically whatever I want to. Whatever looks good to me, I can go get, right? This idea about they kind of all interlock and they play off of one another and possibly lead to a sinful lifestyle. The 1 John chapter 4, how does our Father feel in relation to when we let ourselves go with all those things? Go to the Gospel of John in chapter 17. I don't think it is any coincidence that John finds himself writing in both the epistle of 1 John and his gospel, kind of a very similar idea on loving the world and the things in the world. John 17, and starting in verse 14. This is in the midst of Jesus' priestly prayer before he would go to the cross, okay? And so, John 17 and verse 14, Jesus says to the Father, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I don't ask that you take them out of this world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in truth, for your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. And for their sake I consecrate myself, that they also may be sanctified in truth. In this prayer, Jesus is talking about the ministry of the gospel and the ministry of the church after he has been resurrected and after he ascends back to the Father. That he doesn't say, hey, when I'm gone, I love these gentlemen so much, don't just take them out of the world. I want you to be with them as they walk through the world. And did you notice the first thing he said in verse 14? I have given them your word. I want you to think about maybe how do we, as Christians in 2023, how do we have Bible class at 9, we have our worship at 10, and then any given Sunday throughout the year at 11 o'clock, give or take, plus or minus, usually minus, and we will go to eat lunch and we will go on our merry way for the afternoon. How do we as Christians reconcile this lifestyle and then we go out into the world for the week and we live in the world and we go beside the world and we work beside the world and we have things and all of that good stuff? How do we reconcile that? Well, I think Jesus talks about it in his prayer. He says, Father, I don't want you to take them out of the world because they're in it, but they're not of it. Well, what does that mean? We understand that that means I'm living for a bigger purpose, a better mindset, but let's go a little deeper than that. That being in the world but not of the world means a whole lot more than when I go to my job on Monday morning, I'm going to say that I'm a Christian. But we know a lot of people in the world, as we talked about in the last couple of weeks, a lot of people in the world say that they are a Christian, a Christ follower, and don't actually follow Him. Well, how do we reconcile that? Jesus says, I have given them your word. Well, for us, how do we be in the world but not of the world? That every day we have to stay in, be mindful of, and focus on His word. That's how we keep from loving the world. When I really, really want to do X, and X looks really good to me, I would be gratified physically if I did this. Or maybe if I did this, I could say, Brady, you are great because your skills got you that. Before I have any kind of interaction with anyone or anything or wherever I might be, maybe ask, will this please my Father? Is this what His word says? How I'm about to treat someone, is that how Jesus interacted and treated with people? If I'm about to love this particular part of the world, maybe ask ourselves, okay, well, I know what God's word says. Is this one thing going to affect or negatively affect my relationship with the Father? This idea about being in the world but not of the world. Jesus says, I've given them your word. They know how to live. I'm going to pray to my Father, protect them from the evil one. They know what to do. They've studied their Old Testament scripture. They've lived with me for 3 years, hearing the words that you want me to give them. Be in the world, but not of the world, in John chapter 17. But then also, and back in the book of 1 John, if you notice there in verse 17 of our passage that we read, let's read that once more. 1 John chapter 2 and verse 17. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. That the point is, this stuff doesn't last. That whatever we want to advance with ourselves, whatever we want to gain or attain, it does not last. That this stuff is temporary for a moment of happiness, maybe similar to the effects of maybe alcohol and drugs. It's only for a small amount of time, and then it goes away, seemingly to our detriment. That's the same. It's the language he's using with loving the world or the things in the world. Dr. Deweese?
Yeah, from Genesis 3, you mentioned, I don't know if you're planning to bring this up, parallel between Eve's perception of the fruit, right? So it says, Genesis 3, verse 6, it was good for food, it was a delight to the eyes, and it was a desire to make one wise. Very parallel to the three concepts. And you think about the root of what got her thinking, I need this, right? It was the enemy saying to her, God doesn't want you to have what He has. And so you've got to take it for yourself. And so in that sense, the root of sin is selfishness. And if you really boil it down, it's really fear, right? Sin is about fear. I'm afraid I'm not going to have what I want or what I need, so I've got to take it. And this parallel here of the idea that it was a delight to the eyes, a desire to make one wise, it was good for food. It's just reminds you that this goes all the way back, right? And even that statement from verse 17, right? What was the consequence of eating the fruit? Right? Is that you will not live forever.
I was not going to make that parallel between what Joe was talking about is in the Garden of Eden when Eve goes to eat the fruit of the tree with her husband beside her. All three things are mentioned in principle on the fall of man. And that should tell you, okay, well, if it got them in trouble, how much maybe aware of how maybe thoughtful should we be of that we have so many things that can get us in trouble too.
Go along with what he said too. Jesus was tempted in all three ways when he was tempted.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
He showed.
Okay, right? So if you remember in Luke chapter 4, Jesus was tempted with food, with carrying up on the mountain, and I will give you everything, okay, that you can see. And then on the pinnacle of the temple, throw yourself down in your hubris, and your angels will save you, right? Those three concepts not only are paralleled with Eve in the garden, but they're also paralleled with the temptations of Christ in Luke chapter 4. I found this, and I thought it was very interesting. From a commentary, notice what the world wants from us: love. Love is expressed in time, attention, and expense. We are encouraged and persuaded to give our time, attention, and money to the things of this world instead of the things of God. If you love the world, there are rewards to be gained. You may find a place of prestige, of status, of honor, of comfort. The world system knows how to reward its lovers. And at the same time, even at their best, the rewards that come from this world last only as long as we live. The problem is that though we gain prestige and status and honor and comfort of this world, we lose the prestige and status and honor and comfort of heaven. It's this tedious balancing act, right? Being in the world, but not of the world. It's so easy to see this big, seesaw effect. That, okay, I'm going to do this one thing for myself that I don't consider God in. I'm going to do this one more thing because I want to do it, and I'm not going to consider God in that plan. I'm going to do this one more thing because, man, I want a little bit more money. I want a little bit bigger house. I want this. I want that. But I'm not going to consider how to use it for God's glory. I'm going to do this one more thing. By the time you think about it, what end of the seesaw am I on? I flipped back to the other side. This idea about when does something become a problem, loving the world, do not love the world nor the things in the world. When do these things become an issue for us? It's when they interfere with our relationship with God. And when that becomes, like we talked about in 1 John chapter 1 in the first class, we had that conversation of, it's not a I'm in salvation, I'm out of salvation. I'm in salvation, I'm out of salvation. But when this problem with our relationship with the Father, when does that problem start? Is when it is becoming a regular thing and a lifestyle. When in our hearts we do not have godly sorrow. After we first realize either of ourselves or a brother comes and tells us, hey, this isn't how you should be doing. When does it become a problem? Is when we stop caring after realizing I've hurt my Father. That John says, do not love the world or the things in the world. Any other comments to this?
Back in John 17, verse 21 and 22, I think that kind of sums it up for me anyway, because it speaks about the glory of the Father. And it's not like we're in this alone, we're like on a team. And so the team acts a certain way. And if we want our glory now, we act like the world. If we want people to take pride in us and see that we're so great and we get along so well, we have an issue. We have an issue with God, if that's the way they see us. And so to assume, well, I'm gonna do this so my house looks just great. You know, what kind of glory is that for God? I think that's one of the first things we always forget, but we should always remember first, is how will this glorify God and me in the end? So we justify the end by the way we live, by the means to get there.
Right. I mean, it's the same principle. I mean, to kind of boil down what you're talking about, it's the exact same principle of, I mean, you guys remember this, right? Whenever you were maybe knee-high years old, maybe you want the cookie in the cookie jar before supper that your mama just got done cooking. Did mama usually ever give you the cookie out of the cookie jar before she let you eat the supper that she just got done working so hard to make? Well, no, right? Why did she not give you the cookie out of the cookie jar, or the cake or the chocolate pie with meringue on it that she just made? Why did she not let you eat that before supper? Because guess what it would do? It would spoil your supper. I think in the exact same way, the same principle applies with loving the world. Okay, we see some things in the world, and I really want to do those or have those things. And they might not be bad in and of themselves, but when they start taking precedence over worshiping my Father, when they start taking precedence over standing for a moral truth we have in Scripture, if they start taking precedence over, you fill in the blank, if they start taking position over the things that God would have us do, it spoils our eternity. Why did Mama not let you eat the cookie out of the cookie jar before you ate that supper she just got done cooking? It's because it would spoil supper. And maybe in the same way, John is writing so passionately, hey, there's a lot of things that look like a cookie in a cookie jar here in this life. This desire of the flesh, this desire of the eyes, and the pride of life, right? These things that they might stand in opposition to Christ openly, or they might just be an alternative to Christ. But both are wrong, right? When they start taking this level or priority over our relationship with our Father, it ends up spoiling supper. It ends up spoiling our eternity with Him. And that's with the passion and ferocity that John is writing in his letter. He says, complete my joy. Everything that we have seen and heard and witnessed from the beginning, this stuff is real. We need to follow Him. We can also mess it up. That in every day that Jesus talked about in His priestly prayer, I don't want you to take them out of the world, Father. I've given them your word. I want you to keep them from the evil one. I want you to help them live as servants of yours while they're out there in the world. And I think that same concept applies to us. That we have His word, maybe in a little bit of a different format. That we understand that when we leave this place, that our identity doesn't change. That the choices that we've already put in the back of our mind that we're going to make, they don't change just because we're not in an auditorium. They don't change just because we're not around our pew buddies, that we're around our co-workers. That this idea about do not love the world or the things in the world is all about our choices that we make. Some things look really, really good, but to us, are they just cookies in a cookie jar? And are we going to let them spoil our supper? Any thoughts as we finish class this morning?
If you leave it up to us, we'll go for the things that we want.
Every
He
time.
knows the things that we need.
Yep. Larry said, if you leave it up to us, we go for the things that we want, but God, as our Father, as our parent, knows better, and He knows the things that we need.
Does that cause us to be content? Like the apostle was saying, I want to be content. You know, it's a surrender.
Sure.
Is it not? To be
Yeah.
content with what you know
Right.
your Father is giving
Yeah.
you. and that's what you need. And when you need something else, that'll come along.
No. That's also another loaded phrase, right? When Paul is talking about in Philippians chapter 4, I've learned to be content in all things, we usually gloss over that. Well, what does it look like to learn to be content? It's to discipline yourself enough to say no to something that I really, really want. And not only to say no to it once, if he's learned it, he's kept saying no to what he wants. That's really, really hard. It's really, really hard for me to keep my hand out of a cookie jar. Anything else?
Ray, when I said hopefully you love your job, I was trying to apply it. Your actions demonstrate that you love it and you're doing it for the right reasons, not for worldly prestige or anything like that, that you're seeking to please Him. We appreciate you. And all you do. Amen.
Thank you for your comments this morning. We will have worship here in a few moments.